Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Exiles Return. Episode 6. Chapter 32. Kellen POV. She was only wearing the t-shirt that Jackson had provided her after her showdown with Abby and Johnny. The cold snow-filled night was biting at her skin. Wolves were naturally warm creatures and could stand a bit of snow, but she had not been near snow in years and she guessed her tolerance was lacking. She had barely been outside 10 minutes and she was already rubbing her arms and gritting her teeth. She knew Arya would be okay with it once out, because she had a beautiful thick coat of fur to protect her. Kellen was looking for a way down from the balcony. She had used to sneak out of her parents' house as a teenager, climb down the drain guttering pipe from the second floor, and then back up and into her room when sneaking back in. Usually had only done it in the winter to play a game of hide and sneak with the boys. Well, today was no game of hide and sneak, it was for real. Though how she would get the children out of the pack in this awful weather she had no idea. Alpha Derek didn't have an Ada. Jackson had said that he was dealing with Tony and Lauren. Well, they could be very difficult, and now that they knew he was the triplets' father she could only imagine that they were going to put on the parent act where she was concerned. Hopefully, they were so hard to deal with that he would be gone until the snowstorm passed and the streets had been cleared. She could then take her dad's car and head for the Shadow Crest pack. Hopefully, that would be her saving grace, but she had no idea when he was due back or how long this storm would take to pass. She also didn't have her mobile phone with her, to check the weather or even call anyone for help. The drain pipe she was looking at was a good 10 feet away from the balcony's railing, a much more difficult thing to get to than the one directly outside of her childhood home, which had been right next to her window. She also had no idea if the thing was completely secured to the building. She could only hope and pray that it was maintained well. If they miscalculated the jump from the balcony, they would fall 5 stories to the ground. It was not likely they would be unharmed by the fall, possibly even worse. They pushed that thought from their minds, preparing for the jump. Kellen moved one of the chairs right up against the railing, so she could use it as a stepping stone onto the railing and not lose momentum when launching themselves out over the 10-foot gap. In a bid to be free, Kellen returned to the suite, closing the doors. She needed to warm up a bit first, seeing as the climb or slide to the ground would be in her body. She needed to be able to feel all her fingers and toes for as long as possible so they wouldn't just plummet to the ground from a great height. It wouldn't matter so much from the second floor, there was plenty of snow falling. It would surely be deep enough to help a short drop to the ground softening the impact. "We'll shift as soon as we're down," Arya stated. "I know you will handle the cold a lot better than I will. We'll make the jump too." "Yes, we will," Kellen relayed back to her. They had done plenty of agility and strength training when they had been here in the pack and running around leaping from fallen tree to fallen tree or rock to rock or leaping over other pack members. It was all good for them. Kellen walked into the bathroom for a hot shower to really warm up her core body temperature before their leap into the cold. She kept her hair dry and stood under the running water, keeping it as hot as she could, and stood there until she was toasty warm, then stepped out and dried herself on the fluffy towels that were laid out for use. Not likely for her but just ready, as were many suites for company or honored guests. It was now or never. She took a deep breath in, to prepare herself for the bracing cold frat she knew was out there, then opened the doors, and took a few steps back into the room, to gain more distance so she could really throw speed into her run. Arya pushed forward and lent Kellen her wolf speed and strength and they ran, stepped, and then leaped out into the open space between the balcony and the drain pipe. Her hands were stretched out towards it. The pipe was very cold and a layer of ice coated it. She could not get a grip with her human fingers. Arya surged forward and her claws were out quickly. One hand had already slid off the pipe. The other hand's claws were scrapping on the pipe. They squeezed with all their might in an attempt to keep their grip. Two claws punctured the pipe and the rest of her hand grabbed onto the pipe. She swung dangerously close to losing her grip, used her feet to steady herself, hooking one of them onto the pipe, and they took a shaky breath as they managed to bring up the other hand and cling to the pipe. She could hear it creaking under her weight and felt it start to give. They were too heavy. They were going to break it. She turned her eyes towards the balcony in case anyone had heard and was trying to get to her. Nothing, they would have trouble getting in the room anyway. Finally, her body stopped swaying and she placed the balls of her feet on either side of the drain pipe and loosened her grip, and they started to slide down. It was a much quicker slide than she liked due to the ice that covered it. Only slowed by the metal sheaths that anchored the pipe to the pack house walls. The first one bit into her feet and she felt the sting of it cutting one of her feet. She had hissed in pain, but endured it, trying to slow her descent. Arya lent her some claws, but this only seemed to weaken the pipes and they creaked even more, and started to shudder. They were only passing the third floor when she heard it tear away from the pack house. Claws retracted instantly and her slide down increased fivefold. The skin on her fingers was being sheared off by the layer of ice. The pipe ripped from the wall above her. She hit the next anchoring spot and prayed it would hold, slipped down past it and was at the top of the second floor. She watched with wide horror-filled eyes as the anchoring shattered, so brittle with the cold, probably years old and never been replaced. Her weight had been its breaking point. The whole down pipe collapsed and she was free falling to the ground. Arya ripped out of her and shifted them in mid-air, trying to save them. She was much more suited to a fall than her human's body. She turned herself over somehow during the shift. The goddess must really be looking out for them at this point. They landed in knee-deep snow, which softened their impact, and she was able to stand up and shake the snow off of herself, with a huff. "Let's not do that again," Kellen agreed. The pipes fell around them and buried themselves into the snow. The snow thankfully muted the noise. If it had been summertime, her escape would have been noticed by many. One of the pipes hit Arya on the back and she snarled in response as it bounced off of her and into the snow. But they had made it. They were down from the Luna suite, and no longer freezing cold either, warm under Arya's thick silver coat. "Let's go." Arya moved off in a slow manner. They did not want to attract attention to themselves. They would have to be staying low to the ground and watch for night patrols, though not many would be this close to the pack house, and most normal pack members would be in their homes sleeping blissfully warm tucked up in their beds, not wandering out in the snowfall. It wasn't really a storm anymore. It seemed to have passed and was just falling in a normal manner. The wind had appeared to have died off as well, which she was thankful for. That would mean her scent wouldn't carry on the wind to any patrolling wolves out there. The Luna suite was off the back of the pack house, and as she made her way around it, she kept herself low, hunkered down as best she could. Arya was much larger now, and hiding in the drift or even moving in something this shallow was no longer in her favor. Long ago, this amount of snow would have been deep enough for her to hide in, creep along unnoticed and unseen. They moved along the side of the pack house and peered around to the front cautiously. She could see by the front door Stephen and Ethan standing there, like they were waiting on someone. He was coming, not far off in all likelihood. They wouldn't just wait on anyone like that out in the snow and cold. It could only be the Alpha himself. No Beta, Arya mused. Probably still guarding the Luna suite. Kellen thought back, slightly amused. He thought he had her trapped, but come on, it was Jackson who had always helped her sneak back into her parents' house. It appeared he had forgotten. More likely, he didn't think we'd do a 5-story escape. Arya chortled, "Little do they know us anymore. They slipped back behind the side of the pack house and moved away, out towards the edge of the forest, a risk of patrols seeing them but not of the Gamma and Delta. They clearly weren't expecting her to be anywhere other than the Luna suite. Keeping low in the snow, they moved stealthily, belly crawling through the snow as they were not interested in gaining either of those wolves' attentions. And setting off an alert for all patrolling wolves or his beta for that matter. Arya's ears pricked up at the sound of cars approaching, she stilled knowing his hearing and sight would be much more acute than his units. Hiding from him had always been an issue, his wolf was not something she had ever been able to hide from, especially once she and Derek had started sleeping together. It was like she was a magnet and he was drawn to it on instinct. She burrowed herself into the snow with just her eyes peering out as they had always done when hiding, to watch for their oncoming wolves. 2 cars pulled up behind the pack's snowplow. She watched as his entire family piled out, including Ray Ray. Her heart skipped a beat. How was it she was here? Had Tony and Lauren caved in, or had he simply gone and taken her for his brother? She wouldn't put it past him. Nowadays. He was standing there, his head tilted, smelling the air. Fear slipped into her, havoc. Arya confirmed, she whined a little inside Kellen's mind. Some part of her was tethered to him, and since he had tried to call to her that day over the phone, a part of Arya wanted nothing more than to go to him. There was no wind blowing in his direction, he couldn't possibly smell them, right? They were a good 500 meters away, even with his sight and smell there was no way he could. His head turned slowly in her direction, scanning the area. Even as he moved on towards the pack house, he was still scanning the area. There was no moon out tonight and nothing to reflect their eyes to him, she prayed. His father's eyes followed his son's but then touched him on the back and they all redirected their attention to moving inside and out of the cold. She briefly wondered how they were going to explain the noise of breaking into the Luna suite to Ray Ray, but let it go, the girl would understand one day soon enough. The moment the pack house door was closed, they moved off in a much quicker manner. It wouldn't take him long to realize she wasn't locked in the suit and the hunt would be on. Her children were on the other side of the pack with her father. They had been heading for her children, but stopped halfway to her father's house. That was the first place they would look. The second would likely be the pack hospital, where her mother was. Where could she go? She had no idea where Brad lived in the pack. He'd still been with her parents when she'd left 6 years ago. Probably only moved out when he met Victoria. Now she had a dilemma, what to do and where to go. She had been hoping that he would not be back until well into tomorrow or even the day after. Jackson surely knew the man was on his way. The bastard had lied to her about his arrival on purpose. She had come to rely on him earlier, thinking he was back to being her friend, wanting to help her, but he and Derek were best friends, not to mention Jackson was the beta, and likely in charge while Derek, their alpha, was off pack territory. The man could do as he pleased, make up and say whatever he wanted to. And clearly he had. He'd tricked her, lulled her into a false sense of security. The massive howl that ripped through the snow-filled night brought Arya low. She laid down in the snow, her ears flat against her herd, her tail curled around her. He knows. Havoc was displeased and displaying it for all his pack to hear. She could well imagine every pack member who was awake was currently doing as Arya was, submitting to their alpha's howl. And those that had been asleep were waking up. Then move, Arya, Kellen whispered at her urgently. Arya whined and whimpered. He was howling for her and she knew it. Every fiber in her being was screaming to answer him. No, don't do it, Arya, Kellen begged her. Knowing it was going to be a losing battle. Arya couldn't fight it any more than any other wolf in pack territory. It was for her and her alone, and Kellen knew it, because no other wolves were calling back to him. He was going to use her howl to locate her direction and hunt her down. Arya stood and lifted her head. No matter how much Kellen begged her wolf, the mighty howl that she let out echoed through the pack. She could not defy him when he was calling directly to her like that, when he was so close. She answered his call with one of her own, a howl so loud, so full of longing, and a need for her alpha to recognize her and want her to be part of the pack once more, that it hurt Kellen's own ears. She wanted to answer him, had wanted to call to him since that day in her office. It was now truly a losing battle. His wolf Havoc would already be on his way. The moment she had answered him, he would have heard her wolf's needs and longing for his approval, her desire to truly be part of his pack once more, and he would be coming for her. Nothing was going to get in his way. "Run, Arya! For the love of the goddess, run!" Kellen yelled at her, and when Arya didn't move, still standing there waiting for her alpha to find her, "For our babies, Arya, please," she begged, "I want to see them one more time before they are taken away from us, don't you?" That thought got Arya moving, and she suddenly realized what she had done, sprinted off of the mark and dashed through the snow with all her speed, away from where she had been standing, heading towards her father's house. He wouldn't do anything to them in front of the children. Surely he wasn't that cruel. Chapter 33. Derek POV. Stepping out of the car, Stephen and Ethan were waiting on the front steps to the pack house for him. Apparently, there was nothing from the Luna suite since she had calmed down. So, hopefully, when he opened the door everything would just fall into place, and they could sit down and talk. Derek was under no illusions. He knew that she was not just going to throw herself at him in a desperate need to have him, never going to happen. Though he had seen it many times before, felt it once himself a very long time ago. The instant connection, the driven need to latch onto your mate and kiss out of them, mark them, and mate them, it was intense to say the least. Kellen, though, had been through a lot, and he knew, no matter what, there was a lot of stuff that needed to be sorted out, and not just with him, but with his brother and his sister with her as well. Waylaying her fears probably wasn't going to be just as easy as her recognizing him. Havoc had other plans he knew Havoc was never letting him get in the way of. Havoc surged to the surface the minute the car door closed, taking in a deep breath. "Arya," popped into Derek's mind. "I know, buddy, they are in the Luna suite. We'll go directly there." "No. I smell Arya here. Kellen has been here, wandered all over the pack, you can just smell her scent everywhere," Derek reassured him. She had not been let out of the suite, that much he did know. Havoc turned his eyes towards the forest, searching along the tree line. Derek saw nothing, just snow. "Come on. Let's go inside and get you your mate." He tried to placate his wolf's increasing thoughts that Arya was out in the woods. He'd always been able to track her, but Derek knew where she was locked in the Luna suite. Jackson would be steadfastly doing guard duty as instructed not to leave her alone. If she had gotten out, they would have told him right away. He felt his father's hand on his shoulder, and they moved off into the pack house. "Michael, take Ray Ray directly to her room. I have to sort out Havoc and Arya," he told his brother, using their wolf's names so he would understand the meaning and its importance. "Yes, Derek," he nodded and took his human mate to the first floor where she would be staying until he had explained to her what he was and what she had to go through to be with him. Then he simply turned and headed for the elevator and headed to the alpha floor. He was actually nervous, he realized. "It'll be fine, son," his father told him calmly, "just take it slow, no pouncing on her, like you probably used to, hey." Yeah, though Havoc was steadfast in his faith that Arya would want him, he was not so certain Kellen wouldn't try to reject him on the spot. She was afraid of him, and that fear was so ingrained into her it might outweigh her bond to him. he did not want nor would accept a rejection from her, but it would hurt just to even hear the words or even see it in her eyes. He stepped out of the elevator and his parents headed for their suite, which just left him with his alpha unit. He could feel them all staring at him. Go! Havoc practically snarled at him. Need Arya now. Jackson unlocked the door as he approached and went to push it open, frowned, and Derek sighed internally, what now? He got there and found it was weighted from the other side. She had barred the door from her side. Goddess, help me out a little. He rubbed his temples and shook his head, leaned his weight on the door as did Jackson. It budged but not much. Kellen, please unbar the door, he called through the slight gap. Her wolf hearing would pick up his voice no matter where in the suit she was. His tone was light, held no anger or animosity, just his normal tone, no alpha in it either. Havoc surged forward and shoved with all his strength. Mate naughty, he chortled. He really liked this side of her, he guessed. He seemed quite excited, too. Derek. Apollo appeared next to him and the two of them used all their strength to shove against the door and it finally slid open, the furniture pushing across the room, enough to allow them to step through the door sideways. He stepped in through the gap, and looked at the mess. Every single piece of furniture in this room was up against the door. He shook his head and looked at Jackson, who simply shrugged. I told you she was throwing a tantrum. I wasn't going to open the door to see what sort. He left Stephen and Ethan to move the furniture out of the way to properly open the door for when he was ready to leave. He turned and headed for the closed door to the bedroom. It was most likely where she was, walked across to it and pushed it open. Nothing barred it. A bracing cold hit him right in the face. She was not in the bed, where he was expecting her to be. There was snow lying on the floor and the French doors to the balcony were open. She wasn't that crazy insane, was she? They were 5 stories up. He could still smell her inside the room. Perhaps it was a trick. He turned and looked at the closed bathroom door, and headed for it. He could smell her again, and opened the door. But they were not there. The room was still warm and there was water droplets on the shower screen. Arya, I smelled her outside. Havoc snarled at him. Here, boss. He turned to find Jackson standing by the end of the balcony. There was a chair right in front of him. That sneaky brat escaped down the drain pipe like old times. Havoc was on the verge of ripping out of him, his anger boiling but directed at Derek himself for not listening to him when they had gotten home. He had smelled her, looked directly into the woods and told him he could smell Arya. Only Derek hadn't listened because he was convinced she was in the Luna suite. He looked down the drain piping, and could see there were scratch marks on them. He could see where it had peeled away from the wall and she would have fallen the last 2.5 stories to the ground. His annoyance at her stubbornness was rapidly turning into anger. She was here locked in the Luna suite to await him to let her out, and yet she had still taken it upon herself to defy him. Havoc snorted. My turn now. Yes, Derek finally agreed. He was overplaying cat and mouse with his mate. He felt Havoc pull forward and shift completely to his giant black wolf form, then he howled into the night air, loud and full of his alpha's authority, a call directly aimed at Arya, a call she could not resist to answer. He knew everyone in the pack would hear it, but only she would have the desperate need to respond to him. He waited. Ears up, tail still, head slightly down as he focused all his alpha senses on being able to locate his mate when she called back to him. Nothing was going to stop him from getting to his mate now. It didn't take long, less than 30 seconds, it was massive and brought his head whipping up. It was filled with loneliness and need to be accepted. Pain pulled at both of them and he was gone, dashing with all the speed he had out of the suite, down the hall and the stairs, launched himself off the 2nd floor, hit the ground running and burst out through the front door uncaring of the damage he would cause and into his pack grounds. His only thought was mate. Her call had come from the center of the town, though he had scented her off to the left of the pack house when they had gotten out of the car, she had not stayed there. He was on the move. He followed his alpha sense and tracked the howl not he sent. He knew the minute he reached the spot she had howled from, there was a deep hollow in the snow where Arya had laid down before responding to him, and her scent was so very strong to him. Heading for her pups. Derek told him without a doubt that was where she was going. He could tell from where the pack house was to where they stood now. Jodi's house. Havoc didn't need to be told where to go. His nose was filled with Arya's scent. He was off at a full run. He could get her before she got there. He was stronger and faster than she was, though that howl she had produced had been as loud as his, almost like listening to a female alpha's howl. He spotted her a few minutes late, running away from him at full speed. She was indeed massive and faster than he had last seen her. Mine, he roared in a massive snarl that nearly brought her wolf to a tumbling halt. His wolf and mate call could not be denied. They watched as Arya stumbled and slid to a stop to turn and look at him. Havoc, however, did not stop at all, was still in full hunt his mate mode, and nothing was going to get in his way. Arya backed away slowly, her tail between her legs and head bowed slightly, her eyes never left his wolf. Havoc skidded to a stop right in front of her, his breathing heavy on her, then he bowed his head down and he touched his head right to hers. It was soft and gentle, surprising even Derek. Havoc licked her snout and moved playfully to nip at her ear. He had never seen Havoc do that before, not even with their last mate, his behavior odd, to Derek. He moved about her stilled body, rubbed himself against her and felt her lean into him, sliding her head along his body, seemingly accepting him just like that. Just like Havoc had said she would. He purred loudly at her acceptance and she purred right back. Derek felt relief sweep through him as he watched from inside Havoc's mind. Then, to his complete shock, she bit the tip of his tail, flicked her tail right in his face and ran off towards the woods, away from where her pups were. Havoc snorted and gave chase, "Mate, play with us." Derek could only hope it was playing. As his wolf chased after her, she wasn't running full speed away from him. Even Derek got the feeling she was taunting his wolf, playing with Havoc. She had answered his call with a need to be accepted, and accepted she had been. Gifted Havoc himself as her mate, he would never leave her. It appeared Havoc's faith in Arya was right on the mark. Derek got to watch as the two of them ran around in the snowy forest. Arya allowed herself to be pounced on many times only to throw him off and run away again. Derek left his wolf alone, to bond with his mate. He had no idea what Kellen herself thought about everything that was going on between their wolves. He could well ask her through the mind link, but did not want to force his thoughts on her at this point. She already knew they were mates now, so when Havoc and Arya shifted back, she would be face to face with him. He must remind Havoc that they would be naked upon shifting back and return them to the pack house or to Jodi's before relinquishing control due to how cold it was going to be. Kellen had not attempted to use the mind link to talk to him either. He knew she could, but was currently choosing not to. She was probably not ready to talk to him. Havoc mated Arya several times as they ran about playing with each other. She had easily submitted to him, hadn't even fought against it the slightest. It seemed Arya was happy with her goddess-gifted mate, that was his wolf Havoc. Derek wondered if she accepted him so readily because they had pups already together or if she was just happy to have a mate at all. Most wolves find their mates early in life, females usually by the time they are 19, and she was 26. That is a long wait for a mate. Even most male wolves would find their mates by that age, only rarely did they have to wait. Havoc was currently lying down next to Arya in the snow, his head resting on her shoulder. She appeared to be sleeping. Havoc was not. He was lying there listening to his mate's heart rate, and breathing, taking in her scent and generally just enjoying being in her presence. Havoc. Told you she would accept me, he snorted, showing his human counterpart that he had been right all along. His tone was very superior. LTS late Havoc, we need to get them back to the pack house, I need to talk with Kellen. You know that you'll not ruin it. He half growled at Derek. I certainly will try not to, if you think I am, come forward and appeal to Arya's nature. Havoc huffed, stood up and nudged his mate Arya. She turned her head and looked up at him. They couldn't actually mind speak to each other until Derek and Kellen mark and mate each other. He could see why his wolf was worried. He too had no idea what was going to happen the minute Kellen appeared and Arya was gone. He nudged her again and she seemed to get the message, walked along beside him as they headed in the direction of the pack house. Havoc playfully nudged her on the way and let her nudge him back. They had this playful nature all the way back. He even allowed her to pounce on him at one point and sit right on him for a few seconds before she ran off and he would chase her. The pack house came into view and he could see Jackson standing there with, to his surprise, Ethan's little sister Margaret clinging to his side all loved up and staring at him like he everything. He guessed the girl was back from vacation with her parents, she would have turned 18 while away, finally found his mate. It was pretty obvious from her hanging off of him, Jackson had an arm around her and was holding her to his side. That was a relief to him. Jackson was watching the two wolves as they approached the pack house. It wasn't normal to walk into the pack house still in wolf form, but he was not going to have Kellen exposed out here in the cold. Chapter 34. Kellen POV. Arya nearly stumbled over her own feet as a mate call was unleashed upon her, loud and aggressive, something that could not be ignored. She skidded to a stop and turned to see who it was. Havoc was running straight at her, he had not stopped as Arya had. Mate, she whispered, backing up slowly as he came straight at her. No, Kellen could not believe it, this couldn't be right. She had seen this wolf's human with her own two eyes, been no more than a meter away from him, only a desk between herself and Havoc's human counterpart. She didn't believe it. But she knew it to be true. Arya knew it was true. Havoc stopped right in front of them, he smelled so good, like the smell of rain just before it fell, with a hint of oak and cinnamon. He was her mate. But why hadn't she known it then, but knew it now? Arya, be careful, he will mate you. Kellen murmured to her wolf, though she already knew Arya was going to let him. For weeks now she'd had this lingering feeling of Havoc in her mind, and that howl she had let out tonight, had told him she was lonely and didn't want to be apart from the pack anymore, she wanted to come home. Arya would not reject the father of their pups, not now. He was her goddess-gifted mate. Havoc's behavior towards Arya surprised Kellen, although he had come racing after her and she fully expected him to just aggressively mate out of her wolf on the spot, he didn't. He was being gentle with her, a little playful and quite loving. He purred at Arya, and she purred right back. Well, now what do we do? Play? Arya piped up and suddenly bit the end of Havoc's tail, then hit him in the face with her tail and ran off, though Kellen knew she was not running to get away, she was running to have him chase her. It was what wolves did when mating, playing with each other. There was no stopping it. Arya was not about to give up control even if Kellen asked her to. So she didn't just stayed in the back of Arya's mind quiet and let her be with her mate. She had no idea how she was going to deal with his human counterpart, or even what Derek thought this very minute, didn't want to know, needed time to try and process everything. Nothing made sense to her at the moment. Shouldn't she have been able to send him out when in his office? Or he her, for that matter, he must be as shocked as she was. The only good thing she guessed was that Havoc was never going to let him hurt her, or punish her, so there was some safety in that. She would have to wait and see. It appeared he either had no control of Havoc at all or he was just allowing them to bond and mate as she was. Kellen had no idea, was too confused at this point. She sighed. Arya and Havoc ran about playing and mating each other many times. Arya was so happy, Kellen didn't think she had ever felt her this happy. Right this minute she was running at will through her own pack, with her mate, knowing her pups were safely tucked up in their beds. Havoc was her mate. Kellen's train of thought suddenly changed. If Derek was her mate, that would make her the future Luna. Her mind moved to being here in the pack today. She'd been placed in the Luna suite. Jackson had asked her if she'd rather he put her in the Alpha's suite. That couldn't be a coincidence. Surely not. Had stated Derek would kill him if he'd put her in his bed. Jackson had even joked about Derek wanting to punish her in the fun way. That bastard knew, oh he was going to die. They all knew, she suddenly realized, which meant Derek also knew and had informed all of them, but why had he not told her that day? Something else was going on, maybe he didn't want her? That one thought brought pain to her heart. She had to stop thinking about it, focused on nothing. Just sat back there in Arya's mind and watched them and tried desperately to keep her fears at bay. She had no idea of how long Arya and Havoc played and mated, just that at some point she could see the pack house coming into view. The showdown she had been dreading was coming, at least it wasn't going to be done with her children around. Did she even want to talk to him right now? She didn't know. He's your mate, he will not hurt you, Kellen, Arya piped up, speaking to her for the first time since finding out Havoc was her mate. He was so angry, Arya. You didn't see it. She sighed. Maybe you misunderstood it. Havoc wants us, trust in him. Havoc strolled right into the pack house and, to her surprise, so did Arya. Wolves didn't usually come into the pack house, shifted outside, then came in. They were headed for the Alpha's office. She shivered as she recalled the last time she was in there. It'll be okay, Arya said softly. She watched as Jackson opened the door and stood aside while Havoc strolled into the office without a care in the world. Arya followed him. He was her mate and she was going wherever he went. She heard the door close behind her and heard him shift weight. She begged Arya. She wasn't ready. Didn't even know if she could do this. A large part of her was filled with fear and wanted to run, right out of this office. She could feel Arya's resistance to the thought she was having. He was standing in front of her now, completely naked, watching her wolf. She had not shifted as he had done, he had probably expected her to, she realized. Arya was happy to look at his naked body, her head tilted as she assessed him completely from head to toe. He chuckled at her wolf. Then he walked over to her and hunkered down. How about I put some clothes on? He smiled right at her and ran his hands over her head and scratched behind her ears for a minute, making Arya purr. You got bigger. I see. His tone was light and playful but still very pretty. A hint of seductiveness could be heard in his tone. He winked right at her, then stood and walked off. She turned and watched him. I might just eat him myself, she murmured to Kellen playfully. See, he is not mad at us. Kellen sighed. He didn't appear mad, but she could only recall the last time she'd seen him. Arya had not been with her, she hadn't seen it. Couldn't understand what she had felt or seen that day. He was back wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Arya, I left the door to the bathroom open, why don't you go in and shift? I would like to see. My mate. His voice soft and gentle, nothing in it that made Arya think she couldn't trust him. She turned and headed off to do as he said. She shifted the minute she was in the bathroom. Kellen closed the door to keep him out. She was naked and needed a minute still. Things were not going as she thought they would. There was a shirt in the room, it was his. He'd always been taller than her, a good foot taller. The shirt would cover her completely but she would still be naked under it. She pulled it on, there was nothing else, it smelled like him. She had once loved walking around in his room in his shirts. If he tried to forcibly mark and mate her, there wasn't much to go through. And he would be much stronger physically. She bit her lip. Stop that, he is not going to, did Havoc. Arya sounded annoyed now. No, but. No buts. I will make you go out there. Arya was warning he not to do anything to ruin her and Havoc's bond. Kellen looked at her appearance in the mirror, washed her face, she was less than ready for this meeting, her hair she smoothed out as best she could, but really that was all she could do. At least it was warm in here. The entire pack house, as did the majority of homes, had heated flooring, to help with wintertime. She could feel Arya starting to get impatient, and sighed, I'm going already, she muttered to her wolf, then turned and stepped out of the bathroom to finally face him. Her heart was hammering in her chest, unfortunately not from pure excitement of the mate bond. He was standing over by the couch, he had lit the fireplace. Had she been in the bathroom that long? Or was he just used to doing it, and could do it with ease? He was watching her every move, she noted he looked a bit on the tense side. Maybe he didn't know what to expect either. She didn't say anything, didn't know what to say to be honest. Just kind of stood there and watched him wearily from near the door to his office. Come in, he said, please sit, we need to talk. I believe he was gesturing to the couch by the fireplace. She looked at the door and wondered if Jackson would still be standing on the other side of it. She heard him sigh heavily. Kellen, please, I know things aren't great right now, but I know you don't understand everything that's going on either. Please sit. I'm not going to touch you, will never hurt you. I'll assure you, you are safe in this room with me. Her eyes moved back to him, met his blue ones for maybe 5 seconds and fell away. She knew what he was to her right this minute, knew what he had been to her all those years ago, and how he'd felt about her the day he'd made her leave. But none of that actually comforted her right this minute. All she could think about was the last time she had been in this office, his anger towards her. She caught movement in her peripheral vision and shot her eyes to him. He'd taken a step towards her, she backed up, a hand reaching for the door handle she knew was back there somewhere. Watched him stop moving and look at her hand, heard him swear softly. Please don't run, he sighed, it hurts every time you run away from me. That's rich, she thought, considering he was the one to tell her to leave and never come back, how could it hurt him? It certainly hadn't the day he had ordered her to, it had only hurt her. She could feel tears brimming at the reminder of the pain she had felt that day. You don't know what pain is, she shot at him a little angry. Yes I do, Kellen. Believe me. I do. No you don't. I lost everything that day. My family, my friends, my pack, the man. She stopped speaking and shook her head. What did you lose that day? Nothing is what? I lost one of my closest best friends that day, Kellen. Because I acted on an impulse, without thinking is all. I am sorry for that, I really am. There is only one reason you're sorry, beg my pardon, 3 reasons you're sorry. The sarcasm came out of her with every word. He was only sorry because she had been pregnant, because they now share pups. That is not true, I didn't even know about them when I was trying to get you to come home. He ran his hands through his hair and sighed, no, this is all screwed up, but we can fix it. She raised an eyebrow at him. That implies. He cut her off in a rush. Don't Kellen, he was shaking his head. Please don't reject me. His hands were out in front of him. Just give me a chance to explain, I can explain. All of it, I promise. Kellen stared at him, he actually looked like he was pleading with her. She stared at him for a long minute. Did you order Abby to hurt my mother? Changing topic was better than him trying to convince her to stay at this point. She needed time to think about everything. No, and she is going to be severely punished first thing this morning. I was extremely pissed off when I heard what she had done. How can you let her just go about and hurt people in the pack? How is it she thinks it is okay? Kellen asked. I had no knowledge of what had happened here. Actually, it happened while I was unconscious due to Wolf's bane injected into me. The Alpha unit can attest to that. None of them had any knowledge of it. I assure you I would never allow that. What Abby did, going to your parents and convincing them to allow her to attack your mother in a bid to get you to come here, was nothing I would ever approve of. What? Did she hear that right? Her mother and father allowed it. No, she must not have heard right. One don't understand. Did you just say they did this to me? Made me feel like that. She shook her head. No. No, they would never. I'm sorry, I thought you knew you did attack Abby. I just assumed you knew. Oh Kellen, I would never have told you like that, I'm so sorry. He stepped towards her quickly. Kellen held up a hand to stop him. Why would they do that to me? Her eyes moved past him around the room and looked at the clock on the wall, nearly 5 a.m., then moved back to him. He was standing no more than a meter away, could probably reach out and touch him if she wanted to. But this was too much. She had to go and talk with her father. It couldn't be, she didn't believe it. She spun on her heel and yanked the office door open, brushed past Jackson who had been there the whole time. No, no, no. I don't believe you, she was saying as she headed for the front door. Kellen, wait, he called after her. She could hear him following her and right this minute didn't care. His hand wrapped around her arm to hold her, and she reacted on instinct, spun around and slapped him right in the face. His head whipped back, his blue eyes went wide with shock and he let go of her arm, just stared at her. Don't you dare stop me, she grated out angrily. She didn't even know who she was angry with at this moment. Him? Her father? Her mother? Her brother? Abby? Herself even? She was just angry. How could anyone do something like that? She stalked out of the pack house and headed directly for her family home. She would find out the truth from her father himself. She banged into the house, her family home. She knew he was up, could hear him with her wolf hearing. He was in the kitchen. She glanced up the stairs, turned her head and listened. Her children were all still sleeping. She stalked her way through the house towards where she knew he was preparing breakfast. Her feet were completely numb from the cold, but she just didn't care at this point. Kellen also knew that the Alpha was following her, as was Jackson. Either one of them could have given her father the heads up, she supposed, probably had. She didn't care. Even Arya was angry along with her now. She too, could not understand why they would put them through that much pain and grief, and for what, to just get her to come home. Derek could have done that simply by walking into a room with her. That twitched her brain a little. She pushed it aside, shook her head as if to clear it and refocused on getting answers from her father. He turned to look at her, a smile already on his face. It was gone in an instant. Baby girl, what is wrong? He asked. She pointed a shaking finger at him as she strode right up to him. Did you do it? Did you allow Mum to be injured just to get me home, for him? She grated out the last two words. She knew they were standing behind her, could smell them both. He more so, being that he was her mate. She watched his eyes move past her to his alpha and beta. Then back to her, baby girl, please understand. She cut him off with a sh of her hand. It was all she needed to know. I trusted you and you let Abby shoot Mum up with a lethal dose of wolfsbane, are you insane? She screamed at him. Well actually, he rubbed his hands over his face, I was the one who hit her with the wolfsbane. I couldn't let anyone else do it. Ivy and your mother wouldn't either, they only trusted me to make sure it wasn't a lethal dose but close to it. Kellen couldn't believe what she was hearing, it was true, they were in on it. They did this to them. She had nearly completely lost herself in her grief over all that was going on, and they did this to her on purpose. She stood staring at him, anger was rolling off of her, she heard Arya snarl in displeasure at what they had gone through. Saw him back up a step. I'm sorry baby girl, we just wanted you to come home, he pleaded with her. And honestly, I didn't think you were ever going to. Abby told us the Alpha was your mate. Neither of us believed her. You'd known each other before, how was it possible? She explained you were here on Pack territory and that's how he knew. It took some convincing, but eventually we believed her, but Bradley was useless at convincing you. So it was put forward by Abby that if Vera was actually injured, seriously, you would sense it yourself and then we would be able to get you to come here. Kellen just stood there and stared at him, they were all in on it, she couldn't believe it, and she had left him here with her triplets, trusted him with her children, hugged him and cried all over him with so much joy at seeing him, being with him, and now to feel so betrayed by him. Hurt, and it wasn't just her that hurt. Arya was hurt by them, and her emotional distress had affected her children too. Her fists balled by her sides in anger as she stared at him in disbelief. She really wanted to lash out at him, give him a good beating as she had done Abby, but her children were upstairs, if she started a fight with him they would hear it and get scared. She felt a hand touch her gently on the shoulder, knew it was the Alpha and growled at his touch. She was not wanting his hands on her right now, she knew what he was trying to do, a mate's scent, a mate's touch could help calm you down. She had yet to accept him, so it would not work to the extent he thought it would, couldn't without her. Wanting it too, she supposed. He'd have more luck sending his gamma her way. His hand slid down to the small of her back to stroke her in gentle circles. Kellen, let's not fight here, the pups are upstairs. He spoke to her softly, soothingly. She had seen her father do this to her mother on many occasions to help calm her down. Oh, she just wanted to punch him right in his handsome face, break a bone or two, she knew where her children were. Her green eyes turned on his blue ones. If you want to keep that hand, I would remove it, she growled at him. Arya may want her mate, may want Kellen to accept Derek, but that didn't mean she couldn't break something in the meantime. Arya was also angry about the situation going on around them. She would not likely hurt her mate, but she would likely allow Kellen to throw a punch here or there if she thought it would not hurt her and Havoc's bond in any way. Their goddess-given bond was sacred, Kellen knew it, Arya knew that Kellen believed in fated mates and that she would not do anything to hurt Arya herself, so some leeway would be given to her with their so-called mate at certain times, like right this minute. She didn't want to calm down, so him trying to use the bond on her was annoying more than calming. His hand fell away from her, she had already proven she would hit him had done so already. She was actually a little surprised to see that he took the hit and didn't go all alpha mad on her. Havoc pushed forward all of a sudden and stared right at her. Whether he was warning her or trying to get to Arya she couldn't tell, he didn't seem angry, just physically showing himself. Arya suddenly surged forward and Kellen was shoved back. Ah, that was it, she felt herself being moved by Arya into Havoc's waiting arms. That bastard knew he could calm her wolf and it was working. She practically melted into him, burying her face into his neck and breathing him in. "What happened to my feisty wolf?" she muttered to Arya. "Our mate bond is strong, and we needed to calm down or a fight with Dad or Alpha would have ensued." Kellen sighed. "Just great, don't want to wake up in his bed, Arya, do you understand me?" Arya chortled at her. "I would never," but there was pure mischief in her voice. For the love of the goddess, Kellen face-palmed herself in Arya's mind, which only made Arya giggle out loud for all to hear. "Untangle yourself and give me back my body," Kellen muttered. She did relinquish her body back but did not untangle herself. And she found herself standing in his arms, her face still buried in his neck. She pushed hard at his chest to get out of his arms. A growl came from him and when she looked up it was still Havoc. "Let go, Havoc," she stated firmly. "Mine," he stated gruffly back. "Arya is yours," she confirmed to him. A large hand was all of a sudden on her face making her look directly into his eyes. "Half blue, half green Arya is mine, you are mine. Accept me." Then he turned her head and slid his nose all the way down her neck right to where he would bite her, to mark her, claim her for himself, leave that pretty silver filigree on the crook of her neck for all to see. Kellen blinked at his actions, completely shocked, and wondered if it was he or Derek who made that statement, or were they actually both talking at the same time. She wasn't game to state no at this point. She had the distinct feeling that if she tried to in any way, shape or form, decline him, he would mark her whether she like it or not. But if she said yes, goddess, he was going to mark her too. There was no way to answer him without his fangs plunging into her neck. He was challenging her to defy him, and demanding her to say yes at the same time. She could feel his mouth on her neck. Goddess, her skin was on fire from where his mouth moved in soft kisses on her mark spot. It was getting to be too much. She had to pull away or she was going to let him mark her whether she was ready or not, whether she wanted it or not. She could hear Arya purring inside of her. She wanted this more than anything. Kellen knew if he marked her, Arya would push forward and mark him back. Wolves and their need to mark and mate each other. All of a sudden she was shoved away and Derek was staggering backwards. "I'm sorry, Kellen." Havoc was a little out of control. Her hand was already touching her mark spot. It was soft and hot, and shot bolts of lightning through her own fingertips when she stroked it. He had not punctured the skin, but he had certainly left a mark on her, that was for sure. A love bite for all to see. The skin was too sensitive for there not to be. Arya huffed, annoyed at the lack of being marked by her mate. She was also annoyed with Derek for stopping Havoc from uniting them. Chapter 35. Derek POV. Trying to rein in Havoc while he was trying to mark Kellen was not an easy feat. It had taken all his willpower to fight his own beast, his own natural instincts for that matter. He wanted to mark her, and with Havoc in full control and his mouth on her mark spot, a part of Derek had wanted Havoc to do it, take the blame for it, but Derek knew he couldn't allow it to happen this way. Their wolves were already mated. It wasn't like she was going to rip Arya from Havoc. She had said as much. Arya was his. So it was just a matter of time before she herself came around to the full sway of their goddess-gifted mate bond. He was staring at her, watching her now. Havoc was practically rolling around in his mind, amused with the situation he had created. That bastard was playing games with their mate, Derek suddenly realized. "You can't do that to her," he muttered to Havoc. "Why, look at her, all flushed and hot and bothered." Derek's eyes moved to his mate. She was indeed flushed and he could smell her arousal in the air. Faint. But there, she was standing there staring at him. Her breathing was heavy, her pupils were dilated and her heart rate was accelerated, but it was the way she was touching her mark spot that got his undivided attention. Her index finger was running along it in slow strokes. He was hard-pressed not to smile at her reaction to his wolf nearly marking her. Perhaps havoc had nearly swayed her. He knew what it felt like when your mate touched you, feeling like your skin was all electrified, with bolts of pleasure wherever they touched you, and the more aroused you became the more intense the sensation was. She hadn't said anything to his apology for Havoc's behavior and was simply staring at him. Havoc had marked her with a love bite, nothing more, but it looked good on her. Goddess, he wanted to just walk over there and pick up where his wolf had left off. Do it. Derek took a step back and allowed both he and her some space. Kellen, please stop doing that, he asked after a minute passed and her hand was still on her mark spot. The scent of her arousal was driving him nuts. If she continued to enjoy the feel of her mark spot, he would not be able to stop himself from actually marking her fully. She seemed to blink back into reality and her hand snapped away from her neck. She shook her head but did not apologize to him. You need to contain your wolf, was all she said on the subject. Her voice was soft, not a hint of anger in it at all. Her arousal seemed to have removed her anger at the current situation. Her head tilted slightly and he could tell she was listening to something. He tuned into the surroundings and could hear the children were awake upstairs. Kellen, what do you want to do? He asked, referring to the fact that his children were about to come face to face with him for the first time. Out, she suddenly snapped to attention, then hurried over to him and grabbed him by the arm, dragging him to the back door, and shoving him outside. He just let her, completely surprised by the fact that she was willingly touching him. I haven't told them about you yet. I need to do that before they see you. Well, actually, Jackson interrupted him. Let's go, boss. We can get you showered and cleaned up and Kellen can talk to them over breakfast. I didn't agree with that, she snapped at him. Kellen, I would like a proper introduction, today please. Derek told her as Jackson was pushing him away from her, away from his mate and his pups. He didn't much like it, but she had said she wanted to tell them about him first, so okay, let's give her the chance. Their happy chirpy voices were so loud they must be in the kitchen with Jody by now. It was no wonder Jackson was pushing him away. Kellen, if you don't want to stay here, after this morning's event unfolded, you and the children can use the Luna suite, he said before turning and leaving. He walked in silence for a bit. Havoc was settled in his mind, calm and happy in the knowledge that Kellen was going to be easily marked at some point. It was just a matter of seduction. You remember how to do that, right? Havoc shot at him. Yes, Havoc, he shot back. What is with your sudden attitude change where Arya and Kellen are concerned? Havoc snorted at him. She's my mate, I want to play with her like we used to, but more fun now. You were never like this last time you were mated, Derek commented. Arya's different, more fun, mischievous even. Derek shook his head and left Havoc to his own thoughts. He could not figure him out. It was like all of a sudden he was a completely different wolf. How many personalities does his wolf have? Just one. Havoc snarled at him, clearly following Derek's thoughts. Just happy now, he stated. So that was interesting, Havoc nearly marking what is yours. Jackson interrupted his thoughts. He apparently wasn't going to, just playing with her. Didn't look like it, from where I was standing. Jody looked nonplussed about it either. I didn't think so either. And I don't particularly care what Jody thought after what he did to her, sent her distress levels way off the charts. BL00DY stup, D all of them. He scratched the back of his neck, then rubbed his eyes. He was actually tired, but the sun was up and he had been awake all night, so what could he expect? Do you think she will tell them? Who knows, but she can't run away now. He laughed. Arya is smitten by Havoc. That much was clear. She'll never allow Kellen to leave. I can presume from the way he strolled her into the pack house and Arya's response this morning in the kitchen, she and Havoc mated. Yes. Derek laughed. Yes, many times. She didn't even so much as argue about it, not one fight, nothing. Then I guess Havoc's faith in Arya wasn't blind, he was totally sure that she would accept him right away, and she did. Jackson half laughed. Derek nodded. He'd had doubts about it, but Havoc had never doubted Arya's ability to want him as her mate. He was never letting her go now, that was for sure. He was curious to see how she would react to him, half-shifted or in a rage. But that was a future problem. By the way, I got a link from Ethan. He chuckled, completely amused by something, cleared his throat and continued. Abby is in your office with Johnny waiting for her punishment. Derek had actually forgotten about that for the moment with all that was going on. Should he wait to punish her with Kellen there? So she could see he meant it, when he said he would punish her. You and Margaret, hey? Derek smiled at him and jabbed an elbow into his side. Jackson grinned at him, so it seems. Ethan no yet. Probably she went running up the stairs yelling for her mum, all excited, when I headed off after you and Kellen. He's going to pound on you, drill you about being faithful and not womanizing around. Please, like I would hurt my mate like that. She's freaking hot, with that red curly hair to her W.A.S.T. and that curvy figure, V.A.V.A. vom. She is perfect in all the right ways. Derek laughed out loud. Yeah, talk like that about his little sister and see what happens. Jackson grinned and wiggled his eyebrows at Derek. Oh Lord, you're going to, aren't you? You know it, boss, got to cause mischief. He was laughing too now. It's why Kellen and'll get along better than any of you and her. We're both mischief makers. Derek couldn't argue on that one, but he would be able to argue about her and Jackson having a better relationship than he and Kellen. Once he had marked and mated her, they would be closer than anyone. He mind-linked Kellen for the first time in 6 long years. Kellen, I have Abby in my office, did you want to be there for her punishment? He knew she heard him, could sense down the link that the connection was intact and quite strong, probably due to them being mates. Probably not a good idea to put me or Arya in a room with her. She simply answered back, you are the alpha, punish how you see fit. He frowned at her words. You are the Luna, do you want to say, in it? He asked, trying to keep cheekiness out of his voice. And just reminding her she was to be his Luna. No, she answered and severed the link. He frowned. Was that a no to him calling her the Luna, or a no to her having a say in it? He thought it had to be the later, or he would be feeling like crap right now, and he was pretty darn certain Havoc would bullet an *RST out of him and run right back there and mark her against her will, whether their pups were in the room or not. He strolled into his office. Ethan's eyes locked right onto Jackson, who smiled right back at him. Morning, Ethan, have a nice family breakfast, did we? Get some good news. His tone was all smooth as silk, and there was an amused twinkle in his grey eyes. Ethan said nothing, just narrowed his eyes at him for a minute, then turned to Derek. Abby, as expected, boss. Derek locked eyes right on her, saw her swallow hard. She was healed, he noted from her wounds that Kellen and Arya had inflicted upon her yesterday. Why Johnny was here he had no idea. He had not requested him to come to this meeting. He walked over and sat behind his desk, just stared at Abby for a solid minute. He watched her start to get fidgety and restless. She was uncomfortable in his presence, that was for certain. He watched Johnny reach out and put a hand on her to comfort her. Abby, what you did was reckless and unacceptable. I have every right to banish you from this pack for attacking another pack member without due cause. "What? You can't do that," she stuttered. "As the Alpha, I can do what I please, I can punish as I see fit," he used Kellen's words. "Mum and Dad would never let you," she snapped at him, her Alpha aura shooting out of her and directly at him. "Where are they? They know you were brought here to be punished. I don't see them here to defend your actions, do you?" he stated flatly, ignoring her aura. She might be pushing it at him, but she was also scared right this minute. She could not overpower him in any way and he knew it. He was also a little surprised that neither of his parents were there this morning. He watched as Johnny turned pale. Jackson looked more than shocked by Derek's comments. As did Ethan. "You, Abby, blatantly with no regard for your own safety, your unborn child's safety or the safety of other pack members," he indicated to her mate. Who he knew had to come to her defense and ended up wounded because of her actions, need to learn a lesson about respect. "I was just trying to get her here for you," she yelled at him, getting angry now. Were you? Or were you just so power-crazed that you thought you could get away with anything?" "They will never let you banish me, I'm pregnant," she stated flatly. "So, even now you believe you are above your Alpha, and are unpunishable?" "Interesting, Abby," he nodded. "But you are right on one thing. I will not banish my pregnant sister. I will, however, derank you." There were several gasps heard throughout the room. Abby shot to her feet and glared at him. "I dare you to try it," she screamed at him. Derek stood from his chair and stared down at his sister, his full Alpha aura on display. He felt Havoc push forward to aid in asserting his power over his sister, and blasted her with all his Alpha aura. I Alpha Derek Browning of the Crimson Ridge Pack. Officially Str. Pu Abby Browning of Crimson Ridge Pack of your Alpha title and reduce you to that of rank warrior. No longer will you be above anyone in this pack. To do as you so please. You will answer to me for every insubordinate action." He watched as she staggered backwards and fell to her knees. She clearly had not believed he could do it, let alone would do it. Tears were pouring from her eyes. He knew it hurt to be deranked, but she must learn she cannot do as she pleased, that there are repercussions to her actions. "How could you?" she cried up at him. "How many times, Abby, did Mum and Dad blip over your blatant insubordination and reckless actions? I will not be like that. You brought this on yourself." Johnny was trying to pick her up off the floor but she wasn't getting up. He watched her eyes glaze over, knew she was calling for backup, looking for help from her parents. Would they? He had no idea, but they knew he had been displeased and was going to punish her, they just didn't know how. "It's no wonder she runs away from you." Abby shot at him angrily. "You're so cruel. Do you really want to push your luck, Abby? I can make you an Omega if you like," he grated out. She gasped at him. He saw the horrified look she was giving him. "Get her out of my sight, Johnny," he told her mate. Johnny helped her up. She reached for him to carry her, but his injury, still not healed, wouldn't allow him to. Derek glanced at Jackson. "Help your brother out, would you?" He simply nodded and walked over and picked Abby up and walked out of the room with her still crying. It would have hurt but not so much that she would still be crying about it. The tears were because she couldn't believe he had actually punished her. His wayward sister had never been truly punished ever, a slap on the wrist here or there, but not actually punished formally. This was a great shock to her. She had suddenly realized she did have to answer for her actions and she simply didn't like it. One down, he thought and sat and waited. It didn't take long for his father to come into his office. No mother, that was curious. She was always Abby's biggest defender. Really, son to a warrior? Yes, she will learn she does have to answer to people, now she has to answer to Delta, Gamma, and Beta BL00DS as well as Alphas. So much for answering to no one. His father shook his head, but that was it. Sat in the chair in front of Derek's desk. How'd it go with Arya and Kellen? Derek raised an eyebrow at his phrasing of the question. Oh come on son, Havoc was on the hunt, we all heard his call and Arya's back, he was off to get his mate, did he? Yes, Derek nodded. Kellen needs more time. Then give it to her. I'll intend, to. Now, just for some clarification, Havoc did mate Arya, yes? Yes, father, why? Just making sure she's not gonna go running off on you again, her wolf, your wolf mating means neither of them would let it happen. Derek agreed with that. How he was going to deal with Jody and Vera he did not yet know. He was extremely unhappy with what they had done to get their daughter back here. They did not know of her current emotional state and probably didn't think it would affect her so much, but it had affected her, so much distress had poured out of her. She had actually not been able to cope. He would have hated to see what would have happened if Stephen had not been there to calm her down. Derek also knew that he could not do anything to her family without discussing it with her first. So, for now, those two had to wait. He was tempted to further punish Michael, but the boy, it seemed, was scared enough. His raging even without Havoc mad scared the life out of his little brother, showed Derek that he would not fall out of line anytime soon. He would be demanding that Michael apologize to Kellen today at some point. Whether he did it in front of Ray Ray or not was another matter, he still didn't know what Kellen had told the girl to get her to change her mind. Only Ray Ray knew that. Certainly didn't go telling her about Michael storming down her apartment with her children inside. That would not have gone down well with Ray Ray. He did know although Ray Ray was here and happy to be so, it actually was Michael who had upset her, not Kellen as Michael believed, so his attitude towards her that day was uncalled for and Derek would demand he apologize. He stood from his desk. Why is mother not here trying to beat me up for deranking her daughter? He asked his father, walking around his desk and heading for the door. I'll imagine she agrees with you, his father shrugged. You could have punished her worse, being deranked is nothing when your parents are still the former Alpha and Luna, and she is mated to a Beta, so it's not like she lost anything. I or your mother never had the heart to punish her, but we always knew some point she would tick you off to no end and you would punish her. Just glad you didn't toss her in the cells, to be honest. Trust me, the thought crossed my mind. If she wasn't pregnant I would have. He was tired and needed a nap. Headed to his suite and mind-linked Jackson, on the way going for a nap, wake me if Kellen wants to talk, or brings the children to meet me, otherwise, see you at lunchtime. Right boss? I had her phone on me last night, find it and give it to her, in case Lauren calls. Will do. Chapter 36. Kellen POV. She had no idea what to do, how to handle her parents at this point. She was really mad at them for what they had done. But part of her was still happy to be here, to see them. She had gone upstairs and had a hot shower, leaving the triplets alone with him. She doubted very much that he would harm them. Kellen was just disappointed in both of them, Brad not so much, he hadn't even really tried to convince her, she now realized, probably hadn't wanted to go along with the plan. It was cold outside and the children didn't really have anything warm to wear, heck she didn't even know anyone anymore to borrow winter clothing from for her children. It was likely she could find spare clothing in Packhouse's laundry. She would have to head there with them after breakfast to sort something out. She seriously doubted Derek would allow her to head into town with them to go shopping, wouldn't believe her. Think she was running away. Not that Arya would ever let her anymore. It was clear Arya was going nowhere. She came back downstairs and popped one of her old winter coats on each of the girls. It hung like a dress on both of them, and she'd fished out an old jacket of Brad's from his wardrobe and put it on Nate. "Where are we going?" he asked her. "To hopefully find you three, some warm clothing that will fit." "Oh," was all he said. She watched him for a minute and sighed. He was expecting something else. Perhaps her to tell them everything she had not before. She had pretty much left out her entire life story to them. They had grown up in the human world, and so she'd not seen fit to tell them about pack life, her family, their extended family, but he had seen the photos in her room and was likely curious. "Come with me," she indicated to the three of them, and they all followed her to the living area. She settled them on the couch, noted her father came into the room. Glared at him, he just frowned back at her. "Why don't you go and check on your mate?" she shot at him. "Not awake yet, I guess." Kellen was likely to be upset for a while about what he had allowed to be done to her mother, his own mate, and they would just have to deal with it. How she would go and see her mother after the knowledge of what had truly happened she didn't know, but knew she would have to. "No, not yet, but I will go if that is what you want." She just stared at him until he sighed and then walked away. Turning back to the triplets, she found all of their eyes on her. "Are you mad, Mum?" Nate asked. "Not really, just disappointed in something your grandpa did, is all. I'll get over it. I suppose, might take a few days." "LS Auntie Ray Ray here yet?" Rosalie piped up. That got her attention. How did they know Ray Ray was here? "Actually yes, she is, in the main house, but how did you know about that?" "That man who talked to us yesterday, asked if we'd like Auntie Ray Ray to come here," she answered back without thinking about it. "What man?" she asked, but could hazard a guess. "Said his name was Derek," Lily answered. "He's in some of the pictures in your room." Kellen ran her hand over her face. Is that what he had been about to say when Jackson interrupted him this morning? She knew they had seen his picture but had no idea he had spoken to them. "When exactly did this happen?" "Just after we talked to Grandma Lauren and Grandpa Tony," Nate answered. "It was snowing outside, we showed them," Lily piped up. "Showed them?" "Yep, that man, Ethan, said we could call him Uncle Ethan if we liked." "You wouldn't mind, video called them, they wanted to talk to us." "Check on us," Rosalie smiled at her. "He's nice, Mummy play games with us and Grandpa." Right, so she still didn't know everything that had happened. Derek had clearly seen and spoken to them already, she sighed. Not much she could do about it now. He'd apparently been about to tell her too. "Who is he?" Nate asked, his question clear and direct. Kellen recalled the way he had looked at the photo of him. He was staring right at her, his green eyes demanding her to answer him. A small smile touched her lips. His alpha genes were 2BL00DY strong. Even at 5 he was trying to assert his dominance and demand answers, and he didn't even know what he really was, or the power he would hold later in life. He was likely going to be an alpha not be reckoned with. "Your father," she said simply, looking right back at him. She had never truly lied to them, just declined to tell them the whole truth. Now it was out, what would they think? They were all silent, both the twins staring at her with their mouths open in shock. Nate didn't really say anything, he'd clearly already figured it out and just wanted to hear it from her. "He is here, and he wants to meet you today. How would you feel about that?" The girls looked a little nervous, but Nate appeared almost emotionless on the subject. For such a happy boy, she didn't like it. "Why now?" he suddenly asked. "He just found out about the three of you, I never told him," short and to the point, truthful. She could see he was thinking about it. You don't have to if you don't want to. I'm sure it will be fine to wait a few days, but... He's like you, with a wolf? Nate asked. Yes, actually this is his pack we are in, he is known as the Alpha. He is in charge of all other wolves in the pack. Kellen noted that both her daughters were holding hands and watching the conversation between her and him. Do you girls want to ask anything? They both shook their heads indicating no. Nate was more than covering what they wanted to ask. In other words, they might not be just like him, but they were in sync most of the time. The bond between the three of them was strong and they could often ask questions directly after each other and not interrupt the flow or topic. It had been a little unnerving at first, but she had gotten used to it. What does Arya think? He asked, surprising her completely. She felt Arya pushing forward so she could see them. Speak with them, you should meet him, she told them. His wolf wants to meet you too. Very eager to meet his children. She stayed on the surface and watched them absorb the news along with Kellen. Whatever he wants, the girls will follow, Arya told Kellen. I know, they always follow his lead. Arya chortled, typical behavior for alpha siblings. I know. Their conversation was interrupted by her father mind-linking her. Kellen, your mother is awake and asking to see you. Fine, on my way. She severed the link. Stood up, looked down at the triplets. Your grandma is awake, let's go see her. She would not deny her mother the chance to see her grandchildren. That was a guilt she could not survive again if something actually did happen to her, and her children had the right to know her as well. The Alpha could wait, she still didn't want to deal with him yet. Arya was instantly annoyed with her for not wanting to be with their mate yet. She had fully accepted him. And couldn't understand why Kellen hadn't. Didn't like that she was still trying to resist him or keep her distance. Kellen ignored her feeling of annoyance for the moment. It had barely been a few hours of realization and she was still awfully confused about some things, including when he knew and why he hadn't told her right away. She wanted that cleared up before she made any concrete plans. He had either lied to her or didn't want her when he had realized. She wanted to know which it was, regardless of the fact that his wolf was not going to let go of Arya, had wanted her without question. She had no idea of Derek's motives at all. His feelings on the subject. Her mother, Vera, sat in her hospital bed. Her wounds were healing well now that Lvy was back. She smiled right at Kellen and reached out her arms to hug her daughter. Even though Kellen was disappointed in her actions, she could not deny the need to hug her mother and feel her embrace. She stepped into it and hugged her back. I'm not happy with you, but we'll get to that later, suppose, she spoke softly into her mother's ear. Then pulled herself back and introduced her to the triplets. Her mother seemed completely taken aback. Her father had clearly not told her, perhaps he thought Kellen would like to do it herself. She watched as her mother's eyes widened in complete shock, as she looked at them. Then she was out of bed in a flash to hug them all in one big hug, squishing them all together and telling them how much she loved them, and that they should call her grandma. Are they the Alphas? Vera asked. Yes. She saw her eyes move to her questioningly. Does he know? Does now? She shrugged. Has he met them? Not officially, that is up to them. I'll guess fair enough. Considering the circumstances around your leaving and all, it appeared her mother was actually on her side, despite what she had done. Kellen felt today was going to be a long day. She was really tired, to be honest, hadn't slept all night, and was emotionally drawn out from having found out the Alpha, a man she'd believed for the past 6 years, hated her, was now her mate. She is second chance mate. She wondered what happened to Sophia. Made a point to remember to ask him. She needed a lot of answers from him. But you won't reject him? Arya stated flatly. Kellen's side was silent for a moment. No, Arya, I will not, if he is honest with me, actually wants me. He does, Arya stated simply. You're so sure of that? Yes, you can't deny my bond with Havoc, and his wolf feels what he feels, Arya replied. You always loved him, even after he banished us, I know this. You can't hide your feelings from me. Kellen sighed, her wolf was not wrong on that account, she had just been so scared for her children that she had pushed herself to be their protector at all times, to allow nothing and no one to come to hurt them, not even him or his mate. Her fear of Sophia's retribution if she ever found out was real. No Luna would stand for bastard children trying to claim what was her children's birthright. She bit her lip, wondered, did he have children with Sophia? Alpha Blaine had told her Sophia was gone, but that didn't mean there weren't children running around. Just one more thing to ask him, perhaps she should make a list and just hand it to him, let him answer in whatever order he saw fit. She was in the pack house headed for the laundry to find suitable clothing for the triplets. They were all looking around at the pack house. Stephen had walked over to her. The minute she walked into the pack house and smiled at her. How are you feeling? He asked her. She could hear the concern in his voice. You're all bastards, do you know that? She shot at him. Knowing he would understand her meaning. He laughed. Yes, but that's okay. His gamma charm fell over her and his southern accent fell out of his mouth. She punched him hard in the arm and he burst out laughing. Sorry Kellen, I did want to tell you but was under orders not to. You'll need to speak to him about why, but he had his reasons. I personally would have just sedated you and dumped you right in his bed. Boom, problem solved. He grinned. You think so, hey? Yep, he nodded. On the topic, Suzy, could you call her and have her come here to assist with the pups? Kellen stopped walking down the hallway, turned to look at him. Why, but she wasn't so dumb, no wolf would just ask for a human to be brought here for no reason, and the stupid boyish grin on his face told her she knew the reason. Well, thank the goddess she had insisted on Suzy not letting them in the apartment that day. She's my mate, he shrugged, but couldn't wipe that stupid grin off his face. Then handed her phone, surprisingly. First Ray Ray and now Suzy, poor women had no idea what they were in for. Where are you going? He suddenly asked her. Well, I have no winter clothing appropriate for the children. She indicated the three of them wearing oversized adult jackets. So I figured the pack laundry would have some in the lost and found. He shook his head. No, that won't do. Come on. Alpha has been preparing for your arrival for weeks now. The pups are already enrolled in school, just no start date I believe, and their rooms are all set up, and though I was not here, my Luna was with you, the whole time. He has likely gone ahead and prepared clothing for them, as well as you, I'm sure. Come, let's go up and see. He grabbed onto her arm and turned her to head back the way they came. What? Wait, I don't want to go up there. Stephen laughed. Oh yes you do, and I know Arya definitely does. He turned to tease her lightly. Just great. Arya was already excited, wagging her tail and prancing happily inside Kellen's mind at the thought of being in her mate's room. He called to the children and they ran towards them, catching up to him. Stephen, she warned him. What, you think you can get past my charm? He laughed softly. Dare you to try, he teased her playfully. As he punched the elevator button and they stood waiting for it. Where is he? She asked nervously. She had made the decision to accept him and this would be the first time coming across him since then. Goddess knows Arya was crazy happy with her, and excited that finally she and Derek would mark and mate each other, which would give her access to her mate via the mind link. Haven't seen him this morning. I crashed out after Havoc ran off to find Arya. You, my dear, are an emotional mess and exhaust me to no end. Sorry about that. He shrugged, comes with the job. They stepped into the elevator and rode it up the 5 floors. She found Luna Darla and Alpha Blaine standing not far from the elevator, clearly expecting them. Both their eyes fell on the triplets right away as they stepped out and onto the floor. She watched as Alpha Blaine's eyes glazed over for a few seconds, then he refocused on the children. Could she introduce them to his parents before him? He was the Alpha. She had no idea what the protocol was here, but clearly Alpha Blaine and Luna Darla didn't seem to care much, as they walked over towards them. To her surprise, Luna Darla sank down on her knees and introduced herself and her maid to the triplets right away, no hesitation at all. Clearly she didn't care what Derek might think about it. Her interest was in meeting her grandchildren, that much was clear. The triplets looked up at her for confirmation and she simply nodded at them. She saw him appear in the hallway, stepped out of the Alpha suite. He was running his hands through his blonde hair, was trying to smooth it over. He was wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt that was well fitted and showed off his ch3st muscles, as well as his abdomen. She could see the outline of his 8-pack. Wow, he'd only had a 6-pack last time she'd been with him. He was barefoot and there was stubble on his chin. He honestly looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, and thrown on whatever was closest to him. When her eyes met his, there was a smile on his face, and she realized he'd seen her take him in from head to toe. Damn it, stupid mate Bond. She heard Arya chuckle inside her head. Our mate is hot. Kellen shook her head and tried to stop the blush that was creeping up her face at being caught checking him out. How embarrassing. He walked right over to her. The triplets were all staring at him. He smiled down at them. How was she supposed to keep her senses about her when he smiled like that? She'd forgotten how much his smile could affect her. Had buried her feelings for him for so darn long that some of them were actually forgotten, but now they were coming back in full force due to the mate bond. Being this close to him, after making the decision to accept him, was not helping her. She was being drawn to him and she really did want answers before. Arya chortled in her mind, Mark and mate, then get answers. No, I need answers Arya. I know we want him, but too much stuff to ignore. I'm sorry, I know you want full access to your mate, but please. Arya huffed. Fine. She refocused on the people around her to find Derek staring right at her. He had probably asked her a question, she realized, but she had been talking with Arya and had not been listening. So used to them being on their own that she had just tuned everything out like she always did, giving Arya her full and undivided attention. Sorry, did you ask something? What brings you this way? Her eyes turned to the children who were all still staring at him. Well, I wasn't coming up here, but Stephen kind of dragged me. Mum says you're our father, Lily said quietly. She had a hand on his jeans on his knee, tugging at it to get his attention. Kellen bit her lip and watched as his eyes moved to the small girl in front of him. She was staring up at him and even Kellen could see the look of hope in her daughter's eyes. They would feel a connection to him as they had with her father. It would likely be pretty instant, especially with him being the alpha. She watched as he hunkered down and smiled at her. Yes, sweetheart, I am your father, now let me see. Which one are you? His head tilted to the side and his eyes narrowed, as if to really look at her. Kellen watched as Rosalie hurriedly stepped up to stand next to her twin sister. They were identical and the girls were clearly wondering if he could tell the difference between them. She had no idea if he knew which girl was which, was a bit curious herself if he could tell them apart. Lily was the more brazen whereas Rosalie was a little reserved, but if you didn't know that you wouldn't be able to tell them apart, Kellen and Arya could pick them by the inflection in their voices, and their scents were different, though not by much. He looked from one to the other for a full minute, then tapped Lily right on her cute button nose. "You are Lily, I believe." The squeal that pealed out of her in her excitement and joy that he knew which child she was ear-piercing. Even Arya whined and shook her head. She watched as both her girls jumped on him in their excitement that their father could tell them apart even though he'd never met them before. He laughed out loud and hugged them to him, as they knocked him off balance and he fell backwards onto his backside. Kellen watched him close his eyes as he hugged them, felt tears well up in her own eyes and had to turn her head to look away from the scene before her. It was something she had always dreamed about, but never ever dared to let herself believe would ever happen. It pulled at all her heartstrings, to see him accept them so readily. She felt a hand on her back and knew it was Stephen Breath. He whispered to her through the mind link. Oh, this was going to be more difficult than she thought. She took a moment to pinch the bridge of her nose and gain her composure, blink away the tears that were threatening to spill down her face. It took a good 30 seconds and she had to breathe her way through it. When her eyes finally moved back to them, he was looking right at her, concern written all over his stupid handsome face. She waved him off, not trusting her voice. If she had to talk to him it might just break her resolve, and she was still mad at him. She watched as he popped the girls back onto their feet and turned to look at his son. Nate was standing there with his arms folded over his CH3ST, he wasn't going to be so easily won over. Kellen thought, "That's my boy, get your stubbornness from me." Derek got up off his backside and hunkered before Nate, extended his hand. "You have looked after your sisters very well." "Someone had to." The boy shot at him and turned and walked away to stand next to his mother. His tiny hand reached up into hers and his grip was very tight. Derek dropped his hand, sighed softly and stood up. There wasn't much he was going to be able to do about it. Nate would come around only when he was ready. Derek's eyes moved to her. "You said Stephen made you." She was headed for the laundry to find winter clothes in the lost and found for the children. He shrugged. "Oh. Well, that I can fix that," he nodded to Stephen. "Kellen, if you and the children come this way, I have made sure already, they will want for nothing." She wanted to yell at him about what right he had to do that, but Arya was warning her not to. In her mind, he was trying to show her that he had already accepted them. Both girls ran up to him, taking a hand each, and smiled brightly up at him, willing to go wherever he wanted to take them. Already accepted him just like that? Alpha BL00DS. She shook her head. Found he was watching her with a raised eyebrow. She didn't say anything, better to keep her mouth shut lest she piss off Arya. Heck, she would wind up marked by havoc if Arya got really mad at her. So she just motioned for him to lead the way. She followed him with Nate holding onto her hand tightly. The boy didn't know what to make of the situation. She hesitated at the doors to the Alpha suite. Did she even want to be in there? He would have been in here with Sophia, and she didn't want to think about that woman. He noted her hesitation and said, "You can leave the room anytime you like, Kellen." He was standing just inside the doors. He had pushed them both open. She noted it was very neat, all black and white walls and white rugs on dark hardwood flooring, with black furniture. Even the lamps were black and white. There was a large mirror over a fireplace and several doors off the room. She had a vague memory of the Alpha suite, but it didn't look like this in her mind. She had no idea where all those doors went. It was Mum and Dad's suite until about a year ago. They moved out and into a smaller suite, seeing as it's just them and Holly, now. And I renovated to make more room. So it doesn't look like you would recall from your childhood. "Who's Holly?" she asked, not knowing the name. He laughed softly, and a shiver ran down her spine. It was deep, gravelly, and filled with amusement. My little sister, actually, she's 5, same age as our babies. Our babies. Arya was suddenly purring at him. So loud he could hear it, they all could. Kellen frowned and rubbed her ch3st. But Arya wouldn't stop, just eased off to a mere hum. Derek chuckled again. I think Arya likes it when I say that. His tone was light and a little playful to her ears. You said you could fix the clothing issue. Kellen changed the subject, trying to ignore how his laugh was starting to affect her. The longer she was in his presence, the harder it was going to be for her to resist him to get her answers. Yes, I did. He walked past her off to her left, and pushed through a door. There were several other doors down the long corridor. She counted 6 bedrooms, 3 of which I have set up for our children. Of course, if they don't like it they may make changes at will. He stepped through the door and pointed to the second and third doors. Girls, go check out your rooms. They ran off screaming with excitement. His eyes moved to Nate. This one is yours, son. He indicated to the first door. Kellen noted that each door actually had their names on them. She watched him let go of her hand and walk over to it and push the door open. Kellen followed him into the room. The twins, it appeared from all the yelling and squealing she was hearing, were completely happy about their rooms. Nate's room had a large bed against the back wall, with light blue bedding, and there was a desk off the left of the bed, over by the window, along with a school bag and uniform draped over the back of a chair. He had his own bathroom and large walk-in closet which stood open. She could see it was filled with clothing. To the right side of the bed was a sitting area with bean bags, a TV up on the wall, a couple of gaming consoles were set up, and there was a remote on the small table which told him he had access to pay TV, and there in the corner was a small fridge and a shelf full of snacks. He was walking around touching things. He had never had a room like this before. If you want to change anything, son, you can. Kellen froze. She hadn't realized just how close Derek was to her. She had been looking around and watching Nate's reaction to realize that Derek was standing almost directly behind her. It was only when he spoke did she realize it. She glanced at him, her eyes met his. He was no more than a foot away, and his deep dark blue eyes were on her, and he was looking at her almost as he used to, with desire burning in them. She swallowed hard and took a hasty step away, further into the room before she was sucked into them and unable to move away. He smiled right at her. Do you want to see our room? He asked softly, through the mind link. His voice had deepened quite a lot. Her eyes widened in shock at his sudden tone, which only made his smile deepen. No, she shook her head, a little bit terrified and little bit excited at the same time. She turned and walked clear across the room to get away from him, the mate bond that was becoming harder by the minute to resist. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.